The boy had nothing left to give, but he was about to offer everything he had. By sunset the next day, an entire tribe would be at his doorstep. They'd be carrying gifts that would turn a forgotten orphan into a legend. But first, he had to get across that river. Emmett Sloan crouched by the muddy riverbank, his whole world shrunk down to the dented tin cup in his hand. He scooped up the brown water, watching the current run fast and mean. 3 days of mountain rain had turned it into a monster. At just 12 years old, Emmett had learned to read the river. He saw the way it grabbed at fallen branches, pulling them under without a sound, and he knew it wanted to do the same to him. His stomach twisted into a hard knot of hunger. It had been 2 days since his last real meal. Behind him, the old cabin he called home was nothing but rotting wood and ghosts. His parents' graves were somewhere upstream, their markers washed away a long time ago by floods just like this one. He was completely, utterly alone. Then a sound cut through the roar of the water. It was a low groan, followed by a terrifying silence. Emmett squinted, his eyes tracing the line of the opposite bank through the thick morning mist. And then he saw him. An elderly man, dressed in native clothing, was losing his fight with the current. His silver hair was braided down his back, dark against the churning water. One of his legs dragged uselessly behind him as he fought to stay upright with a walking stick. The water was already at his chest. "Help!" The man's voice was a ragged whisper, almost swallowed by the river. "Please!" Emmett's first instinct was pure survival. Run. Strangers meant trouble, and out here, trouble was just another word for death. But he couldn't move. Something in the old man's eyes held him in place. It was the same hollowed-out emptiness he saw in his own reflection every single morning. A look that said the world had already taken everything. The man slipped. The current snatched his walking stick, and it was gone. His head went under the brown surface, and there was nothing but swirling water. Emmett didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds. He just moved. He plunged into the icy water, and the shock of it stole his breath. The current slammed into him like a battering ram, spinning him sideways. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but he pushed forward until his numb fingers closed around a handful of the old man's shirt. He pulled. The man's weight was an anchor, threatening to drag them both down into the dark. But Emmett refused to let go. He dug his feet into the mud, his small frame powered by a strength he never knew he possessed. Somehow they made it. They collapsed on the bank, a tangled heap of mud and desperation, gasping for air. The elderly man's dark eyes locked onto Emmett's, and for the first time in months, Emmett saw something other than pity. It was gratitude. "Gray Wolf," the man whispered, touching his own chest. Then he pointed a trembling finger at Emmett. "Brother." Emmett helped Gray Wolf to his feet, letting the old man lean on his thin shoulder. They stumbled up the muddy embankment, step by careful step. The river had claimed the walking stick, but Gray Wolf seemed to draw strength from Emmett's presence. "My people," Gray Wolf said, his voice raspy. He gestured toward the distant hazy mountains. "Must return." Emmett just nodded. He didn't know who this man's people were or where they were going. He only knew one thing for sure. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't alone. But what neither of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that they weren't alone out here at all. From the deep shadows of the tree line, a pair of hidden eyes had watched the entire thing, and those eyes did not belong to a friend. The old cabin wasn't much, but it was all Emmett had. Gray Wolf limped inside, his bad leg leaving a trail of blood and river mud on the warped floorboards. Emmett's eyes darted to the loose board near the fireplace, where he kept his entire fortune. Half a loaf of moldy bread, a handful of dried beans, and a small pouch of salt. "Sit," Emmett said, guiding Gray Wolf to the one rickety chair that could still hold a man's weight. The old man's breathing was shallow and painful. His weathered face had gone pale. Gray Wolf's eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. He saw the torn blanket in the corner that served as Emmett's bed, the cold, empty fireplace, the bare walls stained with water and sorrow. "You live here alone?" Grey Wolf asked. Emmett nodded, a hot flush of shame creeping up his neck. What did this dignified man see when he looked at him? A feral boy, barely surviving in a ruin. "How long?" 8 months. Emmett pried up the loose floorboard and took out his supplies. The green spots on the bread seemed darker in the dim light of the cabin, but it was all he had. "Since the fever took my parents." He offered the bread to Grey Wolf. The old man took it with a reverence that made Emmett's throat tighten. He broke off a tiny piece, then handed the rest back. "Keep," he said, his voice firm. "You need strength." They ate their small meal in a heavy silence. Emmett kept watching Grey Wolf's face, waiting for the pity, for the judgment. But he didn't see it. All he saw was respect, as if jumping into a deadly river for a stranger wasn't a stupid thing to do, but a brave one. "Your parents," Grey Wolf said finally, his voice soft. "They raised a good son." The words hit Emmett harder than the river had. When was the last time someone had said he was good? When was the last time anyone had seen anything but a hollow-eyed ghost? Outside, a low rumble of thunder echoed across the valley. More rain was coming. Grey Wolf grunted, trying to stand, but his injured leg gave way. "Must go," he insisted, his jaw tight with pain. "My people, they will worry." "Not in this storm," Emmett said, pointing to the cracked window. The river was already rising, turning into a brown, angry sea. "It's too dangerous." A strange mix of fear and frustration flashed in Grey Wolf's eyes. "You don't understand. They will think I am dead. My granddaughter. She has the sight. She sees things others cannot." He trailed off, but the unspoken words hung in the air. If he didn't return, something terrible would happen. Someone he loved would pay the price. Rain began to pound on the cabin roof like a drumbeat of doom. "We'll wait for morning," Emmett said, his voice more certain than he felt. "I'll help you get home then." Grey Wolf gripped Emmett's shoulder, his hand surprisingly strong. "The debt I owe you. It cannot be measured in words." Emmett didn't know what that meant. As he settled onto his torn blanket for the night, a new feeling stirred in his chest. For the first time in 8 long months, someone needed him. He had a purpose. What he didn't know was that his purpose was about to get a lot more complicated. Because through the driving rain and the darkness, 3 riders were already closing in. They had been sent by Grey Wolf's tribe to find their missing elder, and they carried news that was about to turn Emmett's entire world upside down. The hoofbeat sounded like a second thunderstorm, growing louder and louder until they were right outside. Emmett pressed his face against the cracked window, his heart hammering in his chest. 3 dark shapes on horseback, moving through the storm with a deadly purpose. Grey Wolf struggled to his feet. "They come for me." "Friends?" Emmett asked, but the tension in the old man's voice told him the answer. "My people," Grey Wolf said, "but they do not know you are here." Before Emmett could ask what he meant, the riders reined in. A heavy fist pounded on the door, making the whole cabin shake. "Open!" a voice commanded in accented English. "We know you're in there!" Grey Wolf started for the door, but Emmett, driven by some instinct he didn't understand, stepped in front of him. He'd learned the hard way that showing fear just invited more trouble, but he never got the chance to open it. The door burst inward with a splintering crack. 3 native warriors filled the doorway, water streaming from their long hair. The leader was a young man with fierce eyes and faded war paint on his cheeks. His gaze swept the cabin and then locked onto Grey Wolf. "Grandfather," he said, and his voice was a strange mix of relief and fury. "We thought you were dead." "Standing Wolf," Grey Wolf replied, touching his own chest in a formal greeting. "I am alive, because of this boy." The warrior, Standing Wolf, turned his cold eyes on Emmett. His hand never left the hilt of the knife at his belt. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing," Emmett said, lifting his chin. "I pulled him from the river." "Lies!" another warrior snarled. "White children do not save our people." Grey Wolf spoke then, a string of sharp, commanding words in his own language. The warriors exchanged shocked glances. Whatever the old man said, it wasn't what they were expecting. Standing Wolf's expression slowly changed from suspicion to outright confusion. "You risked your life?" he asked Emmett, his English slow and deliberate. "For a stranger?" Emmett just nodded. He needed help. One of the other warriors whispered something to Standing Wolf, whose eyes went wide. Grey Wolf spoke again, a longer speech this time, gesturing toward Emmett with unmistakable respect. "My grandfather says you have a pure heart," Standing Wolf translated, clearly struggling to believe it himself. "He says the Great Spirit sent you to save him." Emmett didn't know what to say. He'd just done what felt right. "Morning Star has been having visions," Standing Wolf continued, his voice dropping lower. "She said grandfather would return with a gift from the river. We thought she meant an object." Grey Wolf placed his heavy hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Not an object, a person." The warriors looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them that Emmett couldn't read. Something important was happening, something that was way bigger than just a boy and an old man. "The storm is passing," Standing Wolf announced. "We ride at first light." "Where?" Emmett asked. "Home," Grey Wolf said simply. "You will come with us." Emmett's stomach felt like it had dropped through the floor. Leave the cabin, the only home he'd ever known, follow these strangers into a world he couldn't even imagine. But then he looked around the rotting shack, at the cold fireplace, and the lonely blanket. This wasn't a life. It was just waiting. Maybe the unknown was better than this empty waiting. "Why?" he whispered. A small, knowing smile touched Grey Wolf's lips for the first time. "Because Morning Star sees more than just visions, boy. She sees the future." He leaned in closer. "And you are in it." But what none of them knew, not even Grey Wolf, was that Morning Star's latest vision hadn't been about the future. It had been a warning about something else that was coming, something that would change not just Emmett's destiny, but the fate of two peoples forever. Dawn broke clear and sharp over the mountains. Emmett gathered the few things he owned, a faded photograph of his parents, his father's old hunting knife, and the dented tin cup. Everything else he left behind. They were relics of a life that already felt like a dream. Standing Wolf helped Grey Wolf onto his horse, the old man wincing as he settled his injured leg. "Can you ride?" he asked Emmett. Emmett shook his head. His parents had been farmers. Their only animal had been a stubborn mule. "You'll ride with me?" Grey Wolf declared, patting the space behind his saddle. The journey was longer than any Emmett had ever taken. They wound through thick pine forests and across wide-open meadows that seemed to stretch all the way to the sky. The world felt so much bigger than his little stretch of river. It felt full of things he'd never even thought to imagine. As they rode, Grey Wolf told him about his people. "We are a small tribe," he said, his voice heavy. "Many of our young have left, gone to the cities, the old ways, they grow weak. But Morning Star sees," Standing Wolf added from his horse nearby. "She keeps the traditions alive." "Tell me about her," Emmett said, curious about the girl who had apparently dreamed him into existence. Grey Wolf's voice softened with a love so deep it was almost painful to hear. "My granddaughter. Her mother died bringing her into this world. Her father was lost in a hunting accident. She has lived with visions since she was a small child. Sometimes they bring comfort. Other times, they bring a warning." "What did she see about me?" Emmett asked. The old man was quiet for a long time, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. A bridge, he said at last. She saw a bridge between two worlds that have forgotten how to speak to each other. Emmett didn't understand the words, but he felt them. A strange tightness in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. They crested a high ridge, and the world opened up below them. There, nestled in a valley, was the tribal camp. A dozen lodges stood in a perfect circle around a central fire pit. Children were playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked, their movements full of purpose. It looked whole. It made Emmett's lonely cabin seem like a wound on the face of the earth. But as they rode down into the valley, a strange thing happened. People stopped what they were doing. They turned to stare at him. But it wasn't with hostility. It was with a bizarre mix of curiosity and recognition. It was as if they had been waiting for him. A young woman emerged from the largest lodge. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, her dark hair woven with feathers and tiny bells that chimed with every step. When her eyes met Emmett's, he felt a jolt. They were the eyes of an old soul, full of a wisdom that didn't belong in a face so young. "Morning Star," Grey Wolf said as they dismounted. She approached slowly, her gaze so intense it felt like she was looking right through him. Her English was precise, almost musical. "You are the one from my dreams." Emmett felt the heat rise in his face. "I don't understand." "3 moons ago," she said, her eyes never leaving his, "I saw you pull grandfather from the river, but I saw something else too." She paused, glancing at Grey Wolf, then back at Emmett. "I saw you teaching our children, and our children teaching yours." "I don't have any children," Emmett stammered. A mysterious smile played on her lips. "Not yet. The spirits show me what will be, not always what is." More people were gathering now, drawn by their arrival. An old woman nodded, her face a road map of wrinkles. A group of young warriors whispered among themselves. Then, a man emerged from the large lodge who could only be the chief. His presence commanded an immediate, respectful silence. He was broad-shouldered, with intelligent eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything. "Grandfather tells me you saved his life," the chief said, his voice a low rumble. "Anyone would have done the same," Emmett mumbled, embarrassed by the attention. "No," Morningstar interrupted, her voice clear and strong. "They would not. That is why the spirits chose you." The chief studied Emmett for a long, silent moment. Then he turned and addressed his people in their own tongue. His words caused a stir, excited murmurs and nods of agreement rippling through the crowd. "We have decided," Chief Standing Bear announced, turning back to Emmett. "Tonight, we will hold a ceremony. In your honor." "What kind of ceremony?" Emmett asked, a knot of nervousness forming in his stomach. Morning Star's eyes twinkled with a light that looked suspiciously like mischief. "The kind," she said, "that changes everything." But not even Morning Star, with all her powerful visions, could have possibly predicted the turn things were about to take. Because the spirits hadn't shown her everything. They had left out the most important part, the most dangerous part. As the sun bled away behind the mountains, the entire tribe gathered. A massive bonfire roared in the center of the camp, sending a column of sparks spiraling up to meet the stars. Emmett sat on a woven mat, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. Chief Standing Bear rose, and his voice carried effortlessly across the circle. "Tonight, we do not honor a warrior. We honor one who showed the true meaning of courage, the courage of compassion." The drums started then, a low, rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to vibrate right up from the ground into Emmett's bones. Dancers moved into the firelight, their movements telling a story of a raging river, a drowning man, and a selfless rescue. "They are dancing your story," Morningstar whispered, leaning close. "How you chose to risk everything for someone you did not know." Grey Wolf limped forward. In his hands, he held a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. He knelt before Emmett and carefully unfolded it. Inside was a necklace. It was magnificent. Hand-carved beads of turquoise and silver gleamed in the firelight. But it was the centerpiece that stole Emmett's breath. A small, perfect carving of a bear, its eyes inlaid with tiny, glittering stones. "This belonged to my son," Grey Wolf said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Morningstar's father, he died protecting our people, just as you risked yourself to protect me." "I can't," Emmett whispered, shaking his head. "It's too valuable." "You already have," Morningstar said softly from beside him. "When you saved grandfather, you became part of this family. The necklace just makes it official." Grey Wolf gently placed the heavy necklace around Emmett's neck. It felt like more than just jewelry. It felt like a promise, a responsibility. "From this day forward," Chief Standing Bear proclaimed, "you will be known as River Walker, friend to our people. Your courage has earned you a place at our fires for as long as you wish to stay." A cheer went up from the tribe, voices raised in songs that sounded as ancient as the mountains themselves. Children, no longer shy, ran up to touch the bear necklace, giggling when Emmett smiled at them. For the first time since his parents had died, Emmett felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire. He felt like he belonged. But as the celebration swirled around him, he noticed Morningstar had grown quiet. She was staring into the flames, her face a mask of concentration that was quickly turning to dread. "What is it?" he asked, the warmth in his chest turning to ice. "The vision," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drums. "It's changing. It's becoming clear." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a fear that chilled him to the bone. "I see men coming, angry men on horseback. They are not here to talk." "What do they want?" Her next words landed like a physical blow. "They want to drive us from this land, to erase us." "When?" Emmett asked, his hand instinctively going to the bear necklace. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice breaking. "They come tomorrow." Around them, the celebration continued, the songs and laughter echoing in the night. But for Emmett, the joy had turned to ash. The necklace suddenly felt heavy, not with honor, but with the weight of a coming disaster. "What are we going to do?" he asked. Morningstar's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "We will pray," she said, "that your courage is not just for the river, River Walker." She held his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering fire. "Because tomorrow you will have to choose, between your old world and your new one." The drums beat on, but their rhythm had changed. They no longer sounded like a celebration. They sounded like a war. Dawn came not with birdsong, but with the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Emmett was jolted awake by frantic voices. Tribal members were rushing through the camp, their movements urgent and practiced. They had done this before. Morningstar was suddenly beside him, her face grim. 12 riders. They carry rifles and the territorial flag. Emmett scrambled out of the lodge. A rising cloud of dust in the valley confirmed her words. Even from this distance, he could see the glint of sun on metal. These were men who had come for a fight. Chief Standing Bear was already issuing commands, his voice calm and steady in the chaos. "Take the children to the caves. Men, gather what weapons we have." "No," Grey Wolf said, his voice cutting through the noise. He leaned heavily on a new walking stick. "These are not war riders. They come to talk, but with bullets to back up their words." "How do you know?" Standing Wolf demanded, a bow in his hand. "Because one of them," Morningstar said, pointing, "carries a white flag." Emmett squinted. She was right, but it looked less like a sign of peace and more like a formality they had to get out of the way before the violence started. "They will make us an offer they know we cannot accept," Grey Wolf said bitterly. "Move or be moved." The riders crested the last hill and formed a hard line facing the camp. Their leader, a man with a tin star glinting on his chest and eyes as cold as a winter sky, nudged his horse forward. "I'm Marshal Bennett," he yelled. "Who speaks for this tribe?" Chief Standing Bear stepped forward, his quiet dignity making the marshal seem loud and crude. "I am Chief Standing Bear. This is our land. You are not welcome, but we will hear what you have to say." "Good," the marshal grunted. "Saves time. I've got papers here from the territorial government. This land's been sold. Mining interests. You've got 3 days to pack up and clear out." "This is the land of our ancestors," the chief replied, his voice dangerously calm. "No piece of paper can sell what was never a man's to own." The marshal's hand drifted down, resting on the butt of his pistol. "The law says different, Chief, and I'm here to enforce the law." It was then that Emmett saw him. One of the other riders, a man with a cruel, scarred face, was staring right at him. A nasty smile twisted his lips. "Well, well," the scarred man called out, his voice dripping with venom. "Looks like we found ourselves a little white boy playing Indian. You lost, son?" Before Emmett could speak, the man's eyes narrowed. "Wait a minute. I know you. You're that orphan. The Fletcher kid from the dead farm upriver." Emmett's blood ran cold. How could this man know his name? "Matter of fact," the man continued, his grin widening, "your daddy owed some people a whole lot of money when he died. Gambling debts." He spat on the ground. "Guess who just inherited them?" The world tilted. His father, a gambler? It was impossible. He was the most careful, honest man Emmett had ever known. "That's right, boy," the scarred man said, enjoying the shock on Emmett's face. "You're coming with us. Now. You can work off your daddy's debt. You do that, and maybe we let these savages pack up nice and peaceful." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "But if you want to stay here and play family with them, well, things might get messy." Emmett felt Morningstar's hand on his arm. He saw Grey Wolf and Standing Wolf step protectively closer. The entire tribe was watching, waiting. His old life, a life he thought was gone forever, had just reached out and grabbed him by the throat. But as he looked into the cruel eyes of the scarred man, and then at the worried faces of the people who had called him family, Emmett realized something. The man had made a huge mistake. He hadn't given Emmett a choice between two worlds. He had given him something to fight for. "Marshal," Emmett said, and he was shocked at how steady his own voice sounded. "That man is a liar." The scarred man's grin vanished. "And I think you need to hear the real story of what happened to my father." Emmett stepped forward, away from the protection of his new family. The bear necklace felt warm against his skin. "My father never gambled a day in his life," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't know he had. "But I know who did." The scarred man's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "Boy, you better shut your mouth before I shut it for you." "My father kept ledgers." Emmett lied, the idea coming to him in a flash of desperate inspiration. "He wrote down everything. Every transaction, every debt, every payment. They were hidden under the floorboards of our cabin. I found them after he died." He saw a flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes, and he pressed his advantage. "Emmett Fletcher was the most honest man in this territory," Marshal Bennett said slowly, his eyes narrowed, studying Emmett. "Never heard a word about him owing a dime." "That's because he didn't," Emmett said. "But someone's been using his name, forging his signature. Someone who figured a dead man couldn't exactly defend his good name." The scarred man's hand twitched, moving toward his gun. "Shut up, boy." "Briggs," the marshal warned, his voice sharp. "Let the kid finish." So his name was Briggs. Emmett filed it away. "Check the territorial records, Marshal," he pushed on, his heart pounding. "I bet you'll find all sorts of debts and claims signed with my father's name. All of them dated after he died. All of them in a handwriting that won't match his." Morningstar stepped up beside him, her presence a silent show of support. "This man speaks the truth," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I can see the deception in the other one's heart like a sickness. Keep your Indian magic to yourself, Briggs snarled, but a sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Marshal Bennett looked from Briggs to Emmett, his gaze shrewd. Briggs, you got the paperwork for this supposed debt? Of course I do, Briggs blustered, reaching into his saddlebag, but his movements were jerky and uncertain. That's when Chief Standing Bear spoke. This man, Briggs, came to our camp 2 moons ago. He said he represented a mining company. He offered to buy our land. When we refused, he threatened us. That's not a crime, the marshal said. No, the chief agreed, but forging documents to steal land is. The marshal's eyes snapped back to Briggs. You saying Briggs is running a con? I'm saying, Grey Wolf interjected, his voice like gravel, that some men will steal anything that isn't nailed down. They steal land from the living, and they steal honor from the dead. You're all liars, Briggs roared, his face purple with rage. That boy owes me, and you savages are trespassing. Show me the papers, Briggs, the marshal commanded, his voice now dangerously quiet. Briggs froze. In that single moment of hesitation, Emmett knew he had him. The man wasn't just angry, he was guilty. Actually, the marshal continued, swinging a leg over his horse and dismounting, I'm curious about something else. Got a wire last week about some forged mining claims filed down in the capital. A whole string of them, all signed by dead men. He took a slow step toward Briggs. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Briggs? That's got nothing to do with this. See, the problem is, the marshal said, his voice dropping to an icy calm, I've been tracking this forgery ring for months, and a funny thing about forgers, they tend to get comfortable. They reuse the same names over and over. Hope surged through Emmett, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. But then he saw the look on Briggs's face change. The fear was gone, replaced by the cornered rat desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Enough! Briggs screamed, and in a blur of motion, he drew his gun. But he didn't aim it at the marshal. He didn't aim it at the chief. He pointed it right at Emmett's heart. The boy dies, this all goes away, Briggs hissed, his voice deadly calm. No witnesses, no questions. Time stopped. The world narrowed to the dark, round hole of the pistol's barrel. Emmett was 12 years old, and he was about to die. A sound like a hornet buzzing past his ear. The shot never came. An arrow, swift and silent, had appeared as if from nowhere. It pierced cleanly through Briggs's gun hand, pinning it to the rough bark of a pine tree behind him. The pistol clattered uselessly to the ground. Briggs let out a scream of agony and disbelief. Before anyone else could move, Standing Wolf had another arrow nocked, aimed steadily at the marshal's chest. But the marshal wasn't looking at him. He was on Briggs in an instant, a knee in the man's back, snapping iron shackles onto his free wrist. Jasper Briggs, Marshal Bennett grunted, yanking the man to his feet. You're under arrest, forgery, fraud, and attempting to murder a child. This isn't over, Briggs writhed, clutching his wounded hand. The mining company still wants this land. They'll send more men. The mining company that paid you to forge those claims, the marshal asked, brushing dust from his knees. Funny thing about that, when their chief forger gets arrested, those claims tend to get real invalid real fast. Emmett's legs finally gave out. He would have fallen if Morningstar hadn't been there to steady him. As for you, Chief Standing Bear, the marshal said, turning to the tribe, I'll be filing a report confirming your tribe's ancestral land rights. Any future disputes will have to go through the proper territorial courts, not through armed thugs like Briggs. The chief simply nodded. Justice serves all people when good men enforce it. The marshal mounted his horse. His men hauled the still screaming Briggs onto the back of a spare horse. He looked over at Emmett. Boy, he said, and for the first time there was a flicker of respect in his cold eyes. You got more courage than men twice your age. Your father would have been proud. As the lawmen rode away, a wave of triumphant celebration swept through the camp. The threat was gone. Their home was safe. But as the joy erupted around him, Grey Wolf approached Emmett, his expression serious. "You have a choice to make, River Walker," the old man said quietly. "The marshal offered to take you back to town. He can find you proper guardians, a place among your own people." Emmett looked around. He saw the faces of the warriors who had been ready to die for him. He saw the women smiling with relief. He saw the children running out from the caves, their fear replaced by laughter. He reached up and touched the smooth, carved bear hanging around his neck. "My own people," he said, turning back to Grey Wolf. He looked the old man in the eye. "These are my people." A brilliant smile lit up Morningstar's face, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "The vision is complete," she whispered. "You have built the bridge." Chief Standing Bear placed a heavy, comforting hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Then you will learn our ways," he said, his voice filled with pride, "and we will learn from you. Together, we will be stronger." As the sun began to set, the tribe prepared for another ceremony, not one of simple welcome, but of true belonging. Emmett helped Grey Wolf to his favorite spot by the fire, the old man's leg already on the mend. "Do you regret it?" Grey Wolf asked. "Leaving your old life behind?" Emmett thought of the empty cabin, the gnawing hunger, the crushing loneliness. Then he looked at the bustling camp around him, alive with purpose and family. "No," he said firmly. "I was drowning long before I jumped in that river. You didn't just save me from the water. You all saved me from myself." Grey Wolf smiled, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. "The river gives and the river takes," he said. "Today, it gave us both a new life." That evening, as the celebration fires burned bright, Emmett finally understood. He was no longer the forgotten orphan boy who talked to shadows. He was River Walker, a bridge between two worlds, the son of two peoples. He was living proof that sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly saves you. The boy who had nothing left to give had somehow found everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an adventure. We've got another story of courage and destiny queued up for you right on the screen. Click it now and let us know in the comments below what you would have done in Emmett's shoes. Your support helps us keep these incredible tales alive.